One of the most interesting healers in Marvel Rivals is undoubtedly Cloak and Dagger. This duo operates as a single character with a healing-focused light mode when playing as Dagger and a damage-focused dark mode when playing as Cloak. Using both is vital to unlocking their full potential. Here's how to play Cloak and Dagger in Marvel Rivals. Up top, I'm gonna be honest. There are easier healers to play effectively, and Cloak and Dagger definitely have a learning curve. But if you enjoy a hybrid playstyle that has great utility for your team and can pump out a surprising amount of damage without really having to aim, Cloak and Dagger may be for you. But this takes a good knowledge of the map layouts and the ability to think ahead so you don't get caught with the wrong character swapped in. In the spirit of getting used to switching between modes, I'm going to go over what each attack and skill does for both modes rather than covering just one at a time. Note that both Cloak and Dagger share the same health pool at 250, and switching back and forth has no effect on it. The basic attacks for both Cloak and Dagger have a soft lock-on. There are no critical hits to aim for with either character, as you'll just hit if you aim close enough to the enemy or ally. Dagger throws, you guessed it, daggers, and her lock-on range is about 35 to 40 meters away from your foe or your friend. Each dagger can ricochet off surfaces if you miss, and even if there's no lock-on reticle, or you're past the 35 meter mark, the daggers can still hit, they just won't track. Each dagger does 15 damage, meaning you need a good 8 or 9 seconds of sustained fire to even take out squishies with 250 health, especially since the daggers need to be reloaded after firing 12 of them.
Pride of the neighborhood.
Dagger's attacks also heal allies, and they lock on in the same way, but only when an ally has some HP missing. If they're fully healed, the daggers will just sail right past them so you won't be wasting any DPS aiming at enemies in the same line of sight. The daggers heal your allies for 30 HP with a direct hit, but extend a small healing field that restores 18 HP to characters around them at a radius of about 8 meters, so firing into a group of allies can have a good residual effect for the team. Cloak trades range, ricochets, and healing for straight damage. The lock-on is pretty generous even though there's no lock-on indicator like Dagger, but the beam won't activate until you're just inside 20 meters away. But once you're in range, the damage stays consistent at 75 HP per second, meaning you can melt a squishy character in a little over 3 seconds, as opposed to Dagger's 8 or 9.
Pride of the neighborhood.
There's also no need to reload. The beam will always channel when aiming close enough to an enemy while in range.
Drown in the abyss.
Dagger's alt fire is Dagger Storm, which throws a clump of daggers that actually do no damage to enemies. They create a small 5 meter radius AoE heal for your team for 55 HP per second for about 6 seconds, and has a cooldown of 15 seconds. Cloak's alt fire, Dark Teleportation, is completely different. Rather than throwing a healing field, he becomes a field with a 10 meter radius that allows himself and nearby teammates to move more quickly, phase through enemy attacks, and briefly become invisible. And I do mean brief, it only lasts 2 seconds. But in that time you can hold jump to float into the air, making this a great repositioning or escape tool. It does have a somewhat lengthy cooldown though, at 12 seconds, so you may want to save it for when it's really needed. Dagger's Veil of Light Force and Cloak's Terror Cape have similar physical properties. They both have a 12-second cooldown and travel about 25 meters, hitting everything in their path. But Dagger's only affects teammates, while Cloak's only affects enemies. Veil of Light Force heals allies for 45 HP upon touching them, and gives them a 15% boost to any healing received for 4 seconds. Terror Cape does a quick burst of 55 damage, blinds them momentarily in a small dome around them, and increases damage received by 20% for 3 seconds. While both of these skills seem to appear about 5 meters ahead of you upon activation, they will still hit anything at point blank range. They don't skip that proximity zone. These have fancy names, but it's just how you switch back and forth between Cloak and Dagger. The only cooldown this move has is the time it takes to switch characters, and you can continue moving. But while changing, you're not invulnerable, so take care while doing it out in the open during a firefight. Cloak and Dagger's individual abilities don't share cooldowns, so if you use Veil of Light Force with Dagger, you can switch to Cloak and immediately use Terror Cape as well. Cloak and Dagger's ultimate, Eternal Bond, operates the same no matter which form you're in while activating it. They perform a series of 3 dashes, each about 15 meters, leaving a light and dark residue over the area you passed. This area lasts about 10 to 12 seconds, and damages enemies while healing allies. Enemies in the residue take 30 damage per second, while allies are healed at a whopping 220 damage per second, so it's much more effective at healing your team than harming your opponents. There may be a minimal effect over time to stacking the dashes on top of one another, but this ult is best used to cover as much ground as possible so you can create a wider positive field of engagement for your team. Try to aim the third dash back towards your allies so that you end up in an area where it's easy to disengage from enemies. The last thing you want to do is launch yourself behind enemy lines, where you can be easily picked off.
Khonshu has guided me this far. I trust him.
Cloak and Dagger's only team up is with Moon Knight. Cloak and Dagger receive a 15% healing buff, and Moon Knight gets a new ability that creates a small field in which he can turn invisible. It lasts for 5 seconds, and he can move in and out of it. When he's out, he reappears briefly. The cooldown on this move is 30 seconds. Cloak and Dagger are best used for maps where you're pushing a cart, since allies and enemies will often be bunched together, or shooting down hallways. Big open areas with zone control points make it harder to keep both your allies and enemies downfield. In the most general terms, Dagger will be your long-range character while Cloak is better up close. He does way more damage and has a built-in escape tool with dark teleportation. Dagger also excels in throwing daggers down a long sightline that contains both enemies and allies. No matter who the daggers target, you'll still be contributing. Look to throw Dagger Storm on nearby walls during teamfights when your allies are grouped together, such as in choke points. Veil of Light Force should be used similarly when you can hit many allies at the same time, but take care not to throw it too early in a teamfight so you're stuck in cooldown when your team really needs it. Terror Cape, on the other hand, is a great way to start engagements as it will disorient enemies, pop their life bar a little bit, and enhance your teammates' incoming fire. As with any healer who does too good of a job, you'll probably be targeted by competent backline DPS or dive tanks, so get used to feeling out when dark teleportation is off cooldown, and keep a vertical escape route in mind when you get in trouble. For this reason, I wouldn't recommend starting fights with it, as you'll need it to get away. It should be used to keep yourself alive. A dead healer is a useless healer. That being said, at least in these early weeks, a lot of players seem to think they can bully you because you're a healer, but Cloak's primary fire does a ton of damage really quickly, meaning you can easily dispatch DPS heroes who get within 20 meters. By the time they try and disengage, it's probably too late for them. Dark teleportation is also vital for neutralizing enemy ultimates, but this requires it to be on cooldown, Cloak to be swapped in, and for you to know the attack is coming, so you need to build your battlefield awareness.
Maximum pulse!
The final 10 seconds!
Good thing you don't have to worry about aiming. And that's our guide on how to play Cloak and Dagger in Marvel Rivals. Make sure to check out our guide on IGN.com for all the newest codes, and for everything else gaming, keep it locked to IGN.